Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Dave, the chairman of the Geospatial Forum. I'd like to welcome everybody to our first virtual Zoom Geospatial Forum general meeting. We do have a few people that are still coming in, so we'll wait just a little bit more before we get started. A few housekeeping items. One, the ability to participate in today's meeting will be through the chat. If you have a question, let us know through the chat, and then from there we will unmute you and you can ask your question. We'll have all questions and announcements from the general meeting attendance will be done towards the end of the meeting, and then we'll get started in a couple more minutes. Still have people joining. And everyone has been muted, but though you can unmute yourself, and then also if you want to ask a question, feel free to do that in the chat. Your name, if you can make sure that your name is using your full name so that we can call on you when you're ready, when we're ready to allow comments. You can do that by under the participant, under your name, you'll see rename, and you can spell out your full name there. Make it a lot easier for us to identify who you are.
The other reason for having your name in there is that attendance list is how we're going to be capturing the info of who was at the meeting for purposes of eligibility to vote.
Correct. Okay, great. We have about 70 participants. That's fantastic. Thanks everybody for joining. Again, my name is Dave Kunz, chairman of the Geospatial Forum. I'd like to welcome everybody for attending today, our first Zoom virtual meeting. The agenda we'll follow is very similar to what we've done in the past. We'll start out with our constituency and our task force reports, and then go straight into our scheduled speakers for today. And then from there, we will open up the discussion and then for questions and announcements. And then discussion and announcements will be requested via the chat, and then we'll moderate and you can unmute yourself, or we'll unmute you, and you can ask your question. All right. To start off, we'll have Andy Rowan from the state give us any updates. Andy?
Morning, everyone. We have a number of updates here. I guess we have to talk about COVID first. We've been supporting Department of Health on handling the data related to the COVID case counts and so forth. If you haven't seen it, linked directly from the state homepage is a dashboard that's a tool that was based on a template that Esri put out that a lot of states are using for reporting case counts and other related things. So we have been sort of in the background on that, handling some of the automation to move the data around. Unfortunately, the staffer over at DOH that's been the lead on that, who was Jonas Miller, took another job just this week. He had his last day at DOH. Now he's down in the city of Philadelphia. So we're going to be continuing to support them they work on that. Ortho imagery, you probably saw an email from me a few weeks ago. We did manage to get the imagery acquisition done before the leaves popped out, which most of us on the project team had actually been bracing ourselves for that not to happen, because early on it looked like spring was going to come really early on us, and we got really lucky. The weather cooled off and the trees held off really just long enough for us to get that acquisition in there. A little bit of leaves on the last few days, but not too bad. We've seen samples of the imagery. The quality looks really good. You may have noticed in the 2015 imagery that there was some sort of atmospheric haze interfering with the clarity of the imagery. We did not have that in this year's collection, so that's good news. And the final delivery of final ortho products for that is scheduled for May of next year. We'll be getting some of it sooner than that, but the last delivery is May 31st. Municipal, county, state boundaries. A few months ago, we updated our municipal, county, and state boundaries. Most of that was related to tuning up the boundary with Pennsylvania that runs down the Delaware River. And that was based on some research that we did along with our counterparts over in PA regarding jurisdiction of islands in the river. And some of that took us back to historical research, back to colonial days, including a trip over to the state library where we thought we would get a look at the original map for one stretch of the Delaware. We were pretty excited about that, to have unearthed that in their holdings. And then when we got over there, they told us we were going to be disappointed because the map was it was drawn in soluble ink and had been water damaged over the years, and you basically couldn't see really anything on it. It was almost like just a rolled up old piece of paper with nothing on it. But the Pennsylvania people did have a copy of it, so we were able to use theirs. Anyway, that's done. We've also coordinated with New York State on the boundary up there, so that they've accepted it as well. And that way, Census Bureau can use our boundary data along those lines. Those updates are already out in Engine Open Data, have been for a while, and we're in the middle now of updating the cached base maps that are in ArcGIS Online to reflect those updates. Mod 4 and parcels. We're waiting to get the Mod 4 data from Treasury. We used to get it a little earlier in the year. They close the files in January every year and then roll out the tax data for the preceding year. Unfortunately, now that's coming later in the year because there's more process that they have to do every year related to some special situations that are going on with the way that assessments are being handled, I think in Monmouth County in particular. So we will probably be getting that data. We haven't gotten it yet, but we hope to be getting it soon. And then later on this summer, we'll roll that data out. Also putting out some parcel updates to go along with that, and then update the statewide composite and the corresponding base map that we have on ArcGIS Online. We've been working a lot on roads and addresses. I'd mentioned previously that we were working on transitioning those data sets over to the NINA Next Gen 911 data model. That work is completed. And we've got the new address points out for download on open data. And we're processing the road center lines to put them out as well. If anybody needs those sooner than when we publish the whole statewide data set, you can just contact us. And we've also begun working in earnest with a number of county and municipal partners in the 911 space to work out joint maintenance of the roads and addresses there. About a half a dozen counties there and a couple of municipalities as well. We also have some big news on address points. We had been hopeful that we would be able to get approval to do a big project to bring the address points closer to completion. And then that was in jeopardy for a while with all the spending cuts that are happening in state government. But the funding that we're using for that was in a special fund that didn't get tapped for filling the budget hole. So yesterday we got the purchase order to move ahead with that and awarded that to Civil Solutions yesterday. So we're going to be spinning up that project real soon. And the goal there is mostly what we're missing in address points is the biggest gaps that we have are in any kind of multi-tenancy rental arrangement. So apartment buildings, commercial rentals, and so forth. We basically don't have any points in those except where we've gotten them from our county partners. So that's going to be the focus of this project, is to create points for those. And then that'll move us that much closer to being ready for Next Gen 911, but it also gives us great data that we can use for all of our other purposes as well. And related to Next Gen 911, the other thing that I have mentioned over the months/years is the big RFP for building the 911 network and doing the rest of the work related to getting the system itself up to next gen standards. That finally did happen. The RFP was released this spring, and then minutes later we got an email that it needed to be pulled back, which made a bunch of us gave us a little bit of blood pressure problems, but in the end, it didn't have to be pulled back. So the RFP is out on the street. The vendors are working on it. Vendor questions have been coming back. So that process is happening. The bid response date is in September, unless it changes. And then the contract award was going to be next spring. What with the fiscal issues that the COVID shutdown has caused, we're expecting that won't happen, but we hope that it will happen in the early part of FY22. So, July-ish of next year, we hope that the process for getting the 911 system upgraded will actually start. And then it's probably a couple of years before it gets lit up after that. So as far as getting the GIS data ready, we probably have about 3 years left to work on that. So that's it for roads and addresses. Soil data, you saw we sent out a questionnaire about the Survey soil survey, and our thanks to everyone who filled that out. We are processing that now, and we're going to be sharing that information with NRCS and work with them later this year to work out a process for updating and expanding the statewide version of Survey soil data that's currently out in Engine Open Data. That's the data that's out there is from a couple of years ago, so we want to freshen that and hopefully make it a little more accessible in terms of its structure. And then the last bit is related to LiDAR. I think we have Roger Barlow, so I'll leave that for him when he talks about the elevation task force. That's it for me, unless there are questions.
All right, Andy, I don't see any questions coming in.
Okay.
All right, great. Thank you, Andy. Now, next we are on to Elevation Task Force, Roger Barlow.
Good morning, New Jersey from Maryland. Originally, I had planned to be at my first day in Ireland today, but things intervened. In terms of Elevation Task Force, we are days away from delivery of the South Jersey QL2 project. As a reminder, that's 5 counties: Ocean, Atlantic, Cape May, Cumberland, and Salem County. We've been following closely, John Tarosky and Doug Schleifer and I in particular. And John has noted that in the Ocean County tide coordination swath, there's one swath in there that seems to have the wrong tide station it's coordinated with, and we're working with the USGS Commercial Partnerships team to see if we can sort that out. Pennsylvania QL2 delivery along the Delaware River is due for delivery probably in September. For those who are interested in Delaware River things, that will cover from the outer suburbs north of Philadelphia along the Delaware up to the New York State border. So that's something that's coming soon. That's all QL2. The Elevation Task Force is planning to meet virtually, I'm virtually sure of, on July 22nd. That's a Wednesday. During that session, we're going to discuss LiDAR derivative products, as was responded to in a questionnaire that Doug Schleifer administered back in March. We'll be looking to make recommendations to the New Jersey Geospatial Forum Executive Committee on which types of products have the most interest and would benefit New Jersey and its municipalities the most. That's what I have.
All right, great. Thank you, Roger. Next up is the Trails Task Force, Mike Shanahan. Well, you're muted there, Mike. Let's see if I can unmute you. Oh, 1 second, Michael. I don't see him in the list. I do not believe his mic is probably not working. Let me see if I can.
Mike, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I don't think his mic's working.
Okay, Mike, just do it in sign language.
Let's see, Mike. Let me try and. I don't even see him in the list anymore.
He's not muted.
Right, he's not muted. He is not in the participant list either.
His face is in the
bottom of the participant list.
In the Brady Bunch.
Right. Yeah, no, I do see him there. I just don't see him on the list. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah, okay. See, I found his chat. All right, so while Mike's trying to figure out his mic issue, let's switch to the Geodetic Task Force and Edith Konopka. Edith?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, I started video. I'm going to try and share my screen. Let's see here.
Yes,
okay.
We see your screen.
All right, this probably isn't going to look ideal, but I'm not going to try to mess around with it anymore. So good morning, everybody. Got a few things to share about activities with the Geodetic Task Force. First question you may be asking is, why are we doing this? And the reason is that the National Geodetic Survey is changing datums and the state plane coordinate systems. And this is coming up in a couple of years, so we all need to get ready for the new world. Some breaking news. The National Geodetic Survey is holding a free webinar about the new state plane systems. This is tomorrow. It's free. You can sign up from their website on the Science and Education tab. Look for the webinar series and it'll be listed under upcoming webinars. So this is aimed mainly at people who know something about the topic already. So if you're a ranked newcomer, it probably won't help you too much, but if you've had a little bit of background on this, you might want to tune into that. Reporting on our first meeting, we had our first meeting in person on March 11th about the last thing we did on the Riverview campus. We had about 24 people there, plus some comments from folks that couldn't attend. We had a presentation by Ron Kuzma from the New Jersey Geodetic Survey about the work they've been doing to get ready for the new datum in cooperation with the National Geodetic Survey. They've been very busy. And we did a round robin to establish the task force goals. If you'd like to see what happened at the meeting and all the outcomes, you can take a look at the documents on the New Jersey Geospatial Forum website on the task force page. So there was a tight deadline if we wanted to have any input about the new state plane system. The deadline for comments about that from the states to the National Geodetic Survey was March 31st. So a bunch of us from the task force and from the New Jersey Society of Professional Land Surveyors took a look at their proposals and recommended one of them. On behalf of NJSPLS, our office, OGIS and the state GIO, and the Geodetic Survey, which is housed in the New Jersey DOT. Gary Veenstra led the charge on that, so we give him a big thanks. And if you want to see the design, there's actually a map that shows it, copied from the National Geodetic Survey site. We've posted it with our other meeting documents on the forum webpage. One item of note, the unit options for the new state plane system will be international foot or meter. So US survey feet, which we've all been working in all these years, are not going to be supported by the National Geodetic Survey any longer. So we did a round robin at the meeting to get ideas from everybody on what the task force goals should be. Here's a rundown of the abbreviated names for those. There's more detail on our webpage, and we're still looking for volunteers to help us accomplish each of these goals. So if you're interested in helping out, learning more about this and helping out, please make sure you're registered both with the forum and with the task force, and then email either me or Gary Veenstra with your area of interest. That's it for me today, unless someone has a question.
Edith, does Roger had a question?
Fire away.
Is there any idea as to the scope and size of work that it will take to adjust statewide data sets such as elevation?
That's going to be a topic under the best practices group, I think, as to exactly how much of that is going to be done, what we're going to do about base maps and those very large data sets from previous work. Obviously, reprojecting everything would be a lot of work, and we're going to have to figure out how much of that actually needs doing. So that would be a topic for the task force to discuss and for consulting with the larger group, I think.
Yeah, would that be like a joint task force meeting?
Probably a good idea, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, great. Are there any other questions for Edith? I don't see any in the chat, Edith. All right, so Michael is back with us. Is Michael's mic working this time?
Hi, everybody. This is Mike Shanahan from Nature Concerns. I hope you can hear me this time. Sorry about that.
Yes, we can, Michael.
Great. Good to see everybody through Zoom. This is a presentation on behalf of, this is for the Trails Task Force, and I'm presenting on behalf of Brandy Chapman from NJ Dept Green Acres. She's a Trails Coordinator there, and Tanya Nolte, the GIS Manager for New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Just a short update I'll read they shared. The Trails Task Force is moving forward into the implementation phase. The implementation plan is to utilize an existing state services contract to select a vendor who can take the existing Trails data sets, compile them to a statewide data layer. That's the larger goal of this task force. Trails data for the whole state shared. This will be guided by attribute and schema recommendations that were drafted by the task force as part of their work. The task force is currently securing funding and finalizing an RFQ, request for quotes. That should be released in October. Goal is to award the contract by the end of 2020, so work can begin in early 2021. Next month in July, members of the task force will begin reaching out to collect trail data. That will help the task force and the vendors to understand the scope of the project, and it'll be the base for the final Trails data layer. Appropriate folks on this meeting should start seeing requests in their inbox soon. Trust and hope that these requests won't overburden anyone and folks will be able to get a good data set out of it. They hope to create a data set that's as comprehensive as possible. So if you have data to share, Trails data, or questions about the data, feel free to reach out in advance to Tanya Nolte at New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Her email is tanya@newjerseyconservation.org, and she's former task force member and former rep here. We thank everyone in task force who has helped get us to this point, and everyone at DEP and Office of GIS who have provided guidance and support, especially as the folks navigate the RFQ process. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Michael. Any questions for Michael regarding the Trails Task Force? All right, I don't see any chats coming in. So Michael, thank you for your report. Okay, next up is our scheduled speakers, the New Jersey Forest Fire Service Incident Reporting. Today with us is Marie Cook, GIS specialist from DEP Bureau of Forest Fire Management, and Ed Apolowski, GIS specialist from DEP Bureau of GIS. Ed, if I slandered your name, I'm sorry. All right, Maria, you're
Hey.
on.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm Marie Cook. I'm Forest Fire Services GIS specialist, and I have some really cool things to show you about the digital reporting system that we developed for the fire guys here in New Jersey. And so bear with me while I start sharing my screen here. Okay, great.
We can see your screen.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so first I just want to get into a little bit of background. I think just like a lot of us, especially with field responsibilities, are dealing with right now, we have a lot of heavy and really inconsistent workflows. And you know, this is just kind of compounded by our lack of access to offices readily right now while a lot of us are working from home. And so if you look at our administrative boundaries map to the right of the screen here, each one of those different colors are regional jurisdictions that we call divisions. And so divisions A, B, and C are going to be referenced throughout this application or throughout this presentation. And so things are being differently within those divisions. And then even furthermore, the gray lines that separate those divisions are local jurisdictions. that we call sections. And so each one of those section folks were really doing things a little bit differently as well. And so we needed a way to standardize the way that information was being reported for incidents throughout the state. To complicate things even more, there were no spatial checks. And so this data never existed in a spatial environment until the end of the year when this data was finalized. And then I had a tech who's on the call, Patrice, thanks so much for all your hard work, making sense of all this tabular data and trying to correct a lot of spatial inaccuracies after the fact. I'm sure it was really frustrating. So that is a huge accomplishment, like not having to do those checks anymore. And then, so what really initiated and really motivated us to get started in this project was that there are multiple federal agencies that were coming together to develop an application or suite of applications for wildfire reporting nationwide. And so what we found was that we report a lot more information here in New Jersey than some of the wildland fire agencies do throughout the United States. And so that application really was falling short. And so the directive came from the top down from our executive forest fire staff in Trenton. And they came to me and said, hey, listen, Marie, the feds are developing something. It doesn't quite meet our needs. And so how can you help? And so, that's really when I got with Ed Apolinsky and Angela Witcher in DEP's Bureau of GIS, filled out a project sheet and got to work on the development. And so what you see here is the report that we were trying to kind of transform. And so everything that you see here in red, that was being reported twice. And so all of the incident information was being reported in 2 phases, and still is, but it used to be reported on 2 different forms, recorded a lot of different times on various different clipboards at the section, division, and then headquarters levels. And so we really needed a way to get rid of all that redundant entry and make the information readily available to everybody as soon as it was reported. And then finally, there are tons of codes. And so a lot of the fields that you see here in the report are coded values for incident types, municipalities and counties, fire causes and things like that, with a big fat lookup book that folks were using. And so we needed a way to kind of incorporate drop downs and coded value lists to really facilitate that entry. And so who are the players here? Who's involved? Like I said, this is a really great partnership between Forest Fire Service and BGIS. We've really, I kind of think that this was a learning process for everybody involved because these tools really weren't being used to this extent before in our experience. And so that was a really great way to work together and get to know each other. And then the creators of our data, that's going to be our field fire wardens, our field staff. So those are the folks that are going out and responding to these incidents. And so they have the responsibility of creating the records to report that incident information. Our division supervisors need the capability to edit in order to support the approval workflow, which you'll see a little bit more about later on. And then finally, the consumers. So we have a ton of information products that are specified for different users. And really, we have every level of forest fire staff consuming those products right now. In addition to the forest fire staff, we actually have kind of transformed our weekly reporting for NHR, which is the group where we fall in DEP, the Natural and Historic Resources Group. And so we have a new information product for those senior staff briefings as well. And so the picture up in the top right of your screen, that was taken by a wildland fire scientist who lives and studies here in New Jersey. And she took part in a workshop that we held in our Mays Landing office. And she said that when she sent me that picture, she said that that was one of the happiest days of her life. And if you understand that this isn't really a group with a ton of technical inclination, this was a really huge product to see our folks on tablets using mobile GIS technology. That was a really big deal for us and continues to be. And then down at the bottom in the forefront, you see a picture taken from Mizpah Fire Tower in South Jersey just a couple weeks ago. And so Larry posted that on Facebook. He said this is my view today from my seat up in the sky. And to me, if our folks up in the fire towers are using that for their situational awareness daily, to me that says that I did my job. And so the solution is really very kind of multi-part here. The Survey123 portion was really a no-brainer, and that is because of the power of that XLS-driven, really form-centric application that just has a geospatial component. And so that geospatial component of our incident reporting is just a really tiny part of what we collect. And so we needed something that really was centered around the form. And then there are various ArcGIS Online tools. We have an approval application built in Web App Builder, various operations dashboards, and even a couple story maps to help pull all that information together. And then down here you see some of the programs that help support our workflows. And so Ed's going to be talking about Survey123 Connect, which is the application used for the configuration and development of that form. I'm using ArcGIS Pro for all of my maintenance and tracking workflows. There's some really neat things in Model Builder, and just, you know, going back to ArcMap now that I've really moved a lot of my work over to ArcGIS Pro is really kind of crappy. And so I really would advocate for switching over to Pro if you haven't already. Dan Oliva wrote a Python script to allow for batch exports of PDF reports. And so that saved me a ton of time. And I'm forever grateful to Dan for his help and contribution to this project. And I use PyCharm to run that Python script. And then finally, the piece that was missing for a long time was really kind of coming back to communication. I didn't have a really great way to communicate with, 30 some odd folks who are in the field a lot and not so in tune with their email. That was a hard lesson for me to learn. And so SharePoint helped me bring everything together in this really kind of interactive way with the guys. And so that has helped out a ton. And so before Ed gets into the configuration of the survey, some of the things that really make this powerful is the ability to group questions. And so here on the right-hand side, you see the certification group. And later on when we demo the survey, you can see that these groups can be expanded and condensed as needed, and that helps with organization. There are a lot of rules like requirements and relevancies that also help assure the quality of your data, and messages and hints that appear. And so here you see in red, are you sure? Choosing yes will generate a form 2. And so the form 2 is that report that you saw a few slides ago. And this message appears once field staff chooses yes for their certification. And so this just reminds them that this report needs to be basically signed, sealed, delivered, ready to go before that export can happen. Something that we had to do kind of to phase the implementation of this product was release a training version of the form, and then later on, once we felt folks were confident enough in their use of the form, then we kind of cut them loose on the official version. And so at Ed's recommendation, we actually maintained that training service and that training form for all of our maintenance and development for whenever we needed to try something new in terms of an appearance or a relevance. So that has really helped make development let us play around with some things without affecting the feature service. And then finally, we can do all our certifications and digital signatures through this Survey123 and just these few certification fields here that you see. And so I'm going to let Ed take over, and he's going to explain some of the configuration in the background that goes into the form.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Why don't we just dive right in? I'll share my screen here. Give me 1 second. Share. Okay, so there's 2 ways to build a survey with Survey123. You can use this web developing tool, which you can get to by logging into your ArcGIS Online, and you go to these little squares up here. And when you get into that environment, this is a very simplified way of doing things. You can just kind of grab these tools and bring them in, and you can, when you're finished over on the bottom right here, you would go ahead and publish that survey. This format gives you some functionality for lists and other things, but to really get into the power of Survey123, you really want to use the Survey123 app, the Connect app, not to be confused with the Survey123, which is where you would actually input data, but this is where you would develop. So you see that training and official 2 different forms that are in my survey here in my application. One of the big benefits to that is we can test updates without affecting the live application. So we can push those out very quickly now. We can do updates if we need to each week just to change hints and lists and things. So it's really beneficial to do that. Otherwise, you'd have to shut down the whole service and start over. So here you get your form. It's a preview. There's some settings. Let's get into the XLS form here. So basically you have these different sheets. You have a survey. This is where I'm going to build my survey and all the questions. This choices tab is where those lists are generated for all those downloads and everything, for the drop downs and etc. And I'll get into a little more detail about that. The settings tab has some other things. This is where the actual title of the form shows up. You would think it would be somewhere else, but that's where it actually lives. I'll talk about that instance name in a few minutes. And then this types tab is kind of like a how-to guide. It gives you some information about some of the things that are going on within this survey. So let's kind of walk through these columns a little bit. This type is the question type that you're going to develop. There's all kinds of different question types. Let me just, if you go to the help, you have your normal set, right? Integer, text, etc. Here's where you can have a select one. You can do select multiple, where it will call one of those lists that we looked at for a drop down or a radio button. One thing to note in the recent updates to Survey123, you can now do point, line, and polygon. You can collect them. I don't think you can collect them all in the same form, but you can collect all three feature types now. Images can be taken and embedded. You can have groups and repeats. And one other one to note is you can record and store audio in your survey. So just taking a look at this, this note is what generates this image that we see here. The select one is calling this list. So when someone looks with that question, they're going to see these values to select from. And so I'm not going to go through all these different types. We'll get a little bit more as we go through. The column here, name, is the field name that you're going to see in your feature service once you publish your survey into ArcGIS Online. You don't want to use spaces. You don't want to use special characters. If you're going to end up in your enterprise SDE, you probably want to use underscores because it will capitalize everything on you. You'll see here, every type of field has to have a label. This label is what's going to be a question on your survey. It will default to the alias unless you supersede that a little bit later in this form that I'll show you. So essentially you've got your question type, your field name, and then the label that you'll see. The next column is the hint. That's where Marie had talked about. You can do HTML formatting in that. You can put hyperlinks in there. You can embed pictures, all kinds of different things you can put into that hints field to help users manage your survey. The next two kind of work together. It's a constraint and any message if that constraint is broken. There's all kinds of things. You can have ranges, max values. A couple examples I can show you here is this fire size field. We wanted it reported in quarter-acre increments. So this formula that we have here is saying if I divide this by 0.25, I should have 0 as a remainder, and the fire size has to be greater than 0. So anytime if the value doesn't meet those constraints, it will not allow the user to submit that survey. One more example of that is here we have a date where anytime a date is entered, it has to be less than or equal to today. You can't add any dates from the future. So let's go back up to the top and we'll look at the next two here. The next two kind of work the same way. This is where you can set required fields. It's pretty straightforward. If it's no, it's not required. If it's yes, it is. And then you have a message. On the form itself, you'll see these asterisks that denote whether or not it's a required response. Appearance is where you control how the question is going to look, whether it's going to be a drop down or a Likert, or you can capture signatures now. There's all kinds of, whether it's a calendar or a calculator. So there's a whole bunch of different appearances that the questions can take. The next column is default. That's pretty self-explanatory. It sets a default value. Read only as well. So you see here, we do have one that's read only. It's the local incident ID. And I'll show that a little bit more when I get to the calculation, why that's set the way it is. So these three are basically where Marie was talking about, where you get into the real power of these XLS forms. This is where I set what questions are relevant. In this case, if the answer to is wildfire is no, this next question becomes relevant. So just to show that real quick. So if I say no, I get another, that question pops up. If it stays yes, I don't have that question. This is an example here in row 10 where if someone, the user picks under incident type, 999 happens to stand for other. And in this case, so when I set those choices, when I do that value, it has to be what the code is, not what the label is. So in this case, I'm saying if someone answers other, provide a text field for them to describe that other. Another one that's pretty cool is we mentioned groups. So here I have a group for aircraft details, but I can set that whole group to be relevant based on the answer to were any aircraft deployed. So in this case, I say, if it's greater than 0, then I want to see this repeat come up so I can describe each aircraft that was deployed. So move on to the calculation. This is where I can set some things. I'm not going to talk about that one right there, but so the local ID, they wanted to be able to have their section ID and the date as a ID. So you see here, I'm concatenating the section ID and the date. From the date field of now, I pull the format of year, month, day, hour, minute, second. So it goes all the way down to the second. And just to show you a quick how that works, I pick my division and then I have a filtered view of my section, and you'll see that local incident ID gets built based on the year, month, all the way down to the second. And you'll also see I'm not able to interact with that. So that's why that's set to read only. We don't want folks mistakenly changing that ID. What's the other? So another real cool thing about Calculate, and I'm sorry if scrolling gives you a little bit of blurriness, but all the way down at the bottom of our form, so you see this form is built with 154 statements. We wanted to collect the latitude and longitude, but you can't get that until someone actually picks on the map. So then once that happens, you can use this pull data function to grab that location. And you'll also see that we actually have a formula here that is rounding that to 5 decimal places. So there's a lot of ways to use this calculate field to develop information that isn't necessarily required for the user to enter. There's a way to pull data from a CSV file also. So let's say you want to use email and phone number, et cetera, with the username. You can then go ahead and grab that using that CSV in a pull data function. So this choice filter, when these three act together, I'm just show you this choice filter for a second here. This is what causes a cascade. So think of where I pick a county and then my municipality list is filtered by that county. So I'll give you an idea how that works in here, where if I choose wildfire, then these values are what I will see in my question. So just give you a quick example of how all three of those can work together to kind of guide you through these forms. So the is wildfire question generates a yes or a no. And if it's a yes, this hidden field gets calculated to be wildfire. And if it's a no, this next question underneath here becomes relevant, and this hidden field becomes set to that value. And then that value is actually what's driving this filter. So let's just take it's easier to look at that. So when I answer yes to this wildfire, you'll see how it goes directly to, it skips that non-wildfire group and goes right to this section, where if I pick non-wildfire type, it then asks me, well, what wildfire group is it belong to, so that it knows how to filter this following question. And if I pick admin, you'll see now I get this group of question and responses. So that's really kind of powerful on how all those things work together. And I'm doing hidden fields to do the calculations so that the user doesn't have to enter extra questions. So just to move on, here's this field repeat count. As far as I know, the main reason for that is you can set the number of repeats that are available. So in our earlier example for our aircraft details, when we answer if there were any aircraft deployed, it will set the allowable amount of repeats for aircraft details. These I've never used. I believe it's set so that if you wanted to have several languages for your form, you would be able to put like French or Spanish here. I've never tried it, but that's what I believe those are for. Our media and audio columns, or audio and image. This is where we can embed images and audio into our form, whether it's in as a note or as a hint. This accuracy threshold is where you can set a threshold for when you're collecting. But the last couple that we really want to look at a little bit deeper is the field type and length. This is where you can bind the field type and length to your feature service. If you don't do this, your strings will all be 254. One note is this null. Anytime you set a field type to null, it won't actually go to the feature service. So that's really helpful in the earlier example where I'm building that group for the only reason I need that group is to filter that following question. So I don't need that in my feature service. So I'm going to drop that so I don't have extra fields. This column is where I can overwrite those field aliases if I wanted to, rather than using the label. And the last one to talk about real quick here is this parameters, ESRI parameters. I'm not sure what other functions this column serves, but when we were using our inbox, and I'm going to show you that in a minute, the repeats were not coming back into for the staff to be able to edit. And so we had to set these parameters in order for that inbox to work correctly. It's just some weird thing that you wouldn't know and we had to do a whole bunch of digging to get that figured out. So we looked at the choices column tab. You can see all the lists and all the cascades that take place in this form. It's unbelievable, really, when you think about it. I'm not going to scroll all the way down the bottom, but it goes into the 3000s for how many we have. This was earlier, we looked at this. So one note here is the submission URL column. If you were to produce a survey and you wanted to do anonymous collections, you would build a layer view in ArcGIS Online. And when you get that layer view, you would then put that URL in here and then republish this. So talking about layer views, before I go to there, I just wanted to go through this settings tab really quick. So in this settings tab in my app, put this in the middle here, get this out of the way. This is where I can set my thumbnail, and where this title is, that's where you would think the title is for the survey, but it's not. It's in that XLS form where I showed you. It's very bizarre, but that's the way it's set up. The style is where I can change the coloring, font, colors, backgrounds. Map tab is where I can choose my base map, choose my preview and detailed zoom levels, change my coordinates, whether I want decimal degrees or. If I am collecting images, I can restrict the size. If you're collecting multiple images, I would not allow restricted, because if you're trying to send 5 or 6 over cellular, we find there's a lot of problems with that. Here's where you would enable your inbox. This basically means that someone can reach out to the service and download a previously completed survey onto their device for re-editing. And this is where that repeat wasn't coming through correctly. And the scent box just allows you to store the scent surveys on your device. So let's just talk about layer views real quick. This is the actual service. It's the feature layer hosted. When I publish that service, you see I can share that with different groups, and I can create different layers views, and you see it's denoted by view. And I can have different viewing levels and different groups that have access to those. The other neat thing about this is, like I said, you can change the visualization. So maybe you don't want to share all the features. You want some kind of filter on the features. I can change the features. I can define fields. So maybe I don't want all the fields available. And I can also define an area of interest. And once I save that visualization, that's what that layer will see when I share it with any information products. Also, if I go to the settings tab, you'll see that this layer does not have enabling edited. So anyone that's interacting with this layer can only view this layer view. They can't actually edit anything. This is where you would be tricky and set up your anonymous editing. And you can set it up so that editors can only see, can only add, they can't actually see anything. That's pretty much all I had. So I'm gonna turn it back over to Marie.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, this extra time allowed you to go into a lot more detail. I'm sure that was really helpful. Thank you. And so I know. Okay. And so here, I just want to demo real quick, go through a survey. And so here you see we have our duplicate forms here. I'm going to go into the training report so I don't accidentally report an actual incident today. And so the idea between the initial and the advanced phases of the report is that not all information is going to be available right as the incident is occurring. But there is some information for administrative purposes that we need right up front. And so that is really where the inbox comes in helpful because a field staff can send in the initial report, go into their inbox, retrieve the report, and then fill out all of the advanced questions. And so you can see all these different groupings. You know, right now with initial chosen, we only have 2 different groupings here. But then once you choose advanced, more information becomes available. And so here I'm going to say, yes, we're reporting a wildfire in the forest. And I'm just going to choose B6 because that's where I live. You see, so only the municipalities and the neighboring municipalities of section B6 are available in this list here. And you see, I start typing Pemberton, and that gives me the 2 choices that fit those characters. I'm going to say that this fire was reported by a fire tower. And so you see that if I choose dispatch, nothing else shows up. But if I choose tower, we have a whole list of our fire towers. And so Lebanon Tower is in Brendan T. Burns State Forest, right up the road. And I'm going to say fire observer Wallen detected. Okay, so this is where we can set our status. I have a note here to make sure that the status is updated before the final report is submitted. Right now I'm going to say that we are under control. And here you can see some folks were using number of firefighters just as a reminder for them for when they go back and do their accounting. So we didn't make that field required, but here are the units that responded are. And B6 and B22, they're the engines that arrived on scene. And so we didn't have any damage, but if we did, we would have a place to enter more information about that damage. Ed was talking about the number of aircraft deployed, and so something really neat that Ed was able to do in the background, that if I choose 2 aircraft, well then 2 records are generated for us to be able to enter that aircraft specific information here. And then a comments box. And so since this is hosted in the cloud, we need to make sure to remind folks that personal identifiable information should not be included. And so this is where we can go into the map and set our incident location. You can change the base map, zoom in, zoom out. And then finally enter the wildfire size. And so We report in quarter acre increments like Ed was saying. And so I'm going to try to submit that report with 0.33 acres and see what that does for us. And so something that we had to do, since we had to make all of our chronology fields available here in this initial report, but we didn't, eventually they will be required, but they're not required for this initial report. So instead of making a requirement for this field, we just put in little hints here to keep folks reminded that they are required if the incident is a wildfire, or in other cases for all incidents. And so here I'm going to choose today's date. Okay, so I'm going to try to report that. And you see right away, that doesn't allow this submittal because it doesn't meet that requirement. And so then it would let you either send now, continue if you need to make more edits, or you can save it to your outbox if you want to hold off, but save the changes that you've already made. And then once this, let's see, so I'm going to continue. And so then the idea is that the user would go back into their inbox, retrieve this report, switch over to advanced, and then you can see that everything that was populated stays populated before, so that gets rid of all of our redundant entry, but keeps all those answers right here for reference in the form. And then additional fields become available, like the day of the week, casualties, actions taken. This repeat is going to generate a related record for this fire. And so this is where the grouping comes in handy too. There were so many different actions taken. And so I thought, well, if there's a way to group these, then we can kind of get rid of a really huge monotonous list. And so, you know, we're going to choose extinguishment. And I think that, you know, for the most part, so here is another example. So, you know, if the fire cause was incendiary, then you're going to see different choices come up. If it was caused by a campfire, you're going to see other choices. And so that's a really cool thing that we were able to do there. And finally, I want to go down to our incident costs. Let's see. Because that has some really cool calculations. Oh, goodness. So see these, there you go. These groupings really help to keep things organized. And so we have various different resources that we need to track costs for. And so let's say we had one salaried employee for 2 hours, and their cost would be $92. And then I'm going to add another record for hourly employees. And then you see once I entered that $30, that calculation was done right there in the form. And so that has huge utility and really cuts out a lot of the math and notepad math that was going on. All right, so I really want to get into some of our products, but I want to give a little bit of background on the approval process first. This is really one of my favorite parts of this whole system. And basically because everything is driven off of arcade expressions that drives the symbology in our different maps. This allows for a rejection and recertification workflow, which is really important because reports aren't always perfect the first time around. And finally, tracking of the report statuses was being done by one person with a lot of other jobs up in our Trenton office. And so this really puts tracking in the hands of our division supervisors and the field staff themselves to keep an eye on the status of their reports. So I'm going to get right into our approval products. And so here you can see in the map, I have active reports and overdue active reports. And so here I have a definition query set for show me only what hasn't yet been approved by that office supervisor. And then I use that twice to symbolize these points in different ways. And so here you can see I have this review status expression where I pulled from various different fields. And so this isn't looking at just one field for report status. This is looking at different conditions that I define, pulling from different fields. And so here you see for submittal to be rejected, these conditions have to be met. And then the last editor has to be one of these division supervisors or myself, since I do some of the maintenance in the background and I need the ability to reject reports. And so that is an example of how you can use different fields to define those different statuses. And then for these overdue reports, So we're actually defining the same thing. So we only have one definition here for a late report, but we can define that in two different ways. And so a report is considered late for a wildfire if it's past 5 days from when it's declared out. However, if it's a non-wildfire incident, you only have 5 days from the time that that's reported. And so we're able to do some really cool things with that there. And so this web map feeds our web app builder application here for approvals. And this is the application that those division supervisors use to go in and approve reports. And so here, something I found was really important was to keep the number of records that you're showing in your map to only what you absolutely need. And so here I created a couple filters to filter active reports and overdue report layers by our division. So here I zoomed to the center of the state here in Division B. And you'll have to forgive us, we're really just getting used to this workflow. And so you see that almost everything here is overdue, but we're getting caught up. And so the idea is when the division supervisor receives the PDF form completed from the field staff, then they're gonna go and, they're gonna review this. I felt like this, folks are already used to looking at this form too, right? And so their eyes are already trained to pick up all the discrepancies and things that may be missing. And so I didn't want to, I was already turning the world upside down. I didn't want to absolutely recreate the wheel if I didn't have to. And so this form was actually initially built in ArcGIS Pro with map series with a ton of dynamic text, but I was getting really weighed down by the related tables. I'll talk about my love-hate relationship with them a little bit later. So that's where Dan Oliva came in and was able to help us out with Python. So anyway, so after, Michael in Division B receives this report from Scotty Nauer, he would go and look it up here in the list. And so let's see, we got to go down to April 4th. Here we go. And so that report becomes selected. I configure the pop-up to look as close to that Form 2 as I could within the bounds of the pop-up here. You can see below, see related records below. And the way I explain related records to folks who aren't so well-versed in GIS is extra clicks. And when I was asking folks, if this configuration was okay and would work for them, I said, listen, it would just take a couple extra clicks to get to that information, down a couple extra layers, and luckily they were just fine with that. And so here you can scroll down to the bottom, and you can see which actions Scotty took on that incident here. And so if Michael's ready to approve or reject this report, he would edit it. If everything is well and good, he would choose that office certified staff to yes, save it, and it would disappear off this list since it's no longer active and it no longer meets the conditions of that definition query. However, if he felt something that was erroneous or incomplete, Michael would change that field certified to no. And what that would do is it would generate, based off of that definition and that arcade expression, that would generate rejection symbology. And so I'm going to toggle over here to our approval dashboard. And so this is really our tracking mechanism here. And so I know that Quincy down in C4, I did a little homework beforehand. I know that he has a rejected report down there. And so you can see this firefly symbology allows for us to pick up on that rejected report really quickly. And so, if his supervisor filled in the comments field to tell him what he needed to change on that report, he would go into the comments and be able to fix it. And as soon as he edited it, since he's an editor, since the last editor would show his name and he's not one of those supervisors, that would go back to the in progress symbology. And so this has really helped with, like I said, tracking at the section levels and the division levels. The division bosses are using this for enforcement, for timeliness of reports. It's a work in progress, but we're getting there. Okay, so I think that is all with the approvals. And just want to go into a little bit about our information products. And so it's really cool, like you've already seen with the approvals, they can be really purpose specific. And so you can design something completely separate for tracking or for certifications or for just information summarization. And then they're really group specific. So like Ed was talking about with the layer views. And so one of those, that executive staff layer view was created because some folks are just enough to be dangerous, right? And so you don't really want them in there editing the data if they don't need to at all. And so that's why we didn't allow editing on that layer view, which would feed our products for the executive staff. And then finally, it's really important to keep in mind which device you're designing these products for. So what we found is that the dashboards that looked really great on my desktop were really, really clunky on smartphones and tablets. And so different products were specifically designed for use on those devices. And so switching back over to ArcGIS Online. Let's get rid of some of that stuff. Okay. And so this is one of the information products through Operations Dashboard that were developed. And so this is our senior staffing product. And so this has taken the place of our weekly reporting to that senior staff group. And when this dashboard is opened, this year-to-date value, January 1st, is already chosen, already populated. And then I went in and I chose a date range for a weekly reporting period, and then chose the end date here to capture that accurate year-to-date total for that reporting period. So that way all of the incidents that have taken place since then weren't lumped in to this year-to-date, these year-to-date values. And so I've gotten a lot of great feedback. I think folks really like how visual this is and how you can just kind of take a quick glance and have a good general impression of what's been going on for that week from that senior staff perspective. This is an operations dashboard that was developed for the folks in South Jersey, the field folks there. So you can see here that all this information on these incident cards was configured to show them exactly what they needed to see from those initial reports. There's a whole list here that is filtered and sorted to show the most recent reports up top. And then you can see this embedded content. And so this is really, really powerful for us anyway. And so something that I noticed before we implemented all of this was that, especially when we're in the season for really good fire weather, our field folks have this danger monitoring console up on their screens constantly. And so I thought, okay, how can I make that a part of what I'm doing so they can see what I want to show on their screen constantly? And that was a really great way to do that, and a really great way to kind of tease folks to just go right to the dashboard instead of going to the console, because it has so much more information here. Something that you'll see here, so you have the option to add a label to these filters, but there's also an option to include no filter at all and choose and provide a choice in the list for that. And so with no filters there, when you open the dashboard, you can see that label and it doesn't take up space up here in the header. And so that was a little bit of a trick that I learned here that I'm working on updating all of our different dashboards to show. And then when it comes down to designing for the different devices. So like I said, those dashboards were really clunky on the tablets, and we have tablets deployed staff-wide. That's how everybody's collecting these reports to begin with. And so I really wanted something for folks to be able to use as like a one-stop console on the tablets. And so you see here that that fire weather console was removed, and it was added in 2 separate tabs here. And so as long as the sites are secure, you can embed web content in these tabs. And so each one of them loads separately. And so that really helps with the responsiveness of the app. They don't all load at once in the background when you first open it up. And then you can see other kind of industry standard reference resources here, like the National Situation Report, some light reading. Our folks follow wildfire today pretty closely. And there's a lot going on in the wildland fire world as things are really picking up out west. And so then you can see how this really is pretty friendly on a small screen, whereas some of the other products may not be. And there's a desktop version as well, and this provides access to the approval dashboard. And so something that I also learned is that when you're creating a web map and you add a service to the map, all of the related tables that come along with that service are added as well. And so that's really important in this approval dashboard, right? But some of the other products, like this operations dashboard, we're not referencing any related tables here. And so I manually went in and had to remove them in order to kind of speed things up in terms of how the applications were loading. I really think that that is probably it for our applications. I have some lessons learned. Mainly that training version for development was really huge. And I know this can be expanded well beyond Survey123. For, you know, I've created training copies, you know, something really useful for all these dashboards and applications is that you can just do a quick save as, and you can kind of play around with some things to see how different actions are going to behave in your applications. Plan your schema really carefully. Like Ed said, there are a ton of choices in that choice list. There are a ton of fields in the schema, but we did our very best to kind of dial that back as much as we could. And that really careful planning of the schema is what allowed for managing with attributes with that approval workflow. And then finally, find a way to centralize your information and communication. Like I said, that was a really, really hard thing from the start that was kind of missing. And you see here a little preview of the SharePoint that I have deployed to be able to do that. And so, yeah, there's going to be bugs and there's going to be updates and things like that. And so you're able to publish some really program specific, internal use only updates to your folks without sending out emails or making a bunch of phone calls. And so this really helped put everything in one place. You see all of our shared resources here. Here's our incident summary board, which is a lot like that senior staff briefing board, all of our operations resources, and then our different administrative resources. And then you see here, this is where all those PDF reports go, broken down by division and by section. And so really this has just become a clearinghouse for all the different resources that folks are using in relationship to the system. And let's see, so here there's a little bit of a bug that we've been experiencing. And here Robbie was able to comment right below and say, hey, listen, this is what's going on. This is my experience. And that's really gonna help us zero in on the problem. So this has just become a really great resource and a missing link for a long time. And so really that's all that I have, but I'd be absolutely happy to answer some questions.
So
Or Ed,
Dave, are we pretty good on time, Dave? Because I have some lessons learned too.
Sure, yes, we're good on time. And there's actually a question for Ed.
Okay, go ahead. I can answer the question before
right.
I go into
The question is from Andy. Is that the form preview that you showed?
Yes.
Is that part of the Survey123 Connect app?
It is. So that's another, actually, I got a question similar to that. So let me just, to make that a little clearer, when you go to the Survey123 website, I am sharing now, right?
Yes.
It is very confusing. Don't ask me why they do this, but we all have this experience with Esri, right? When you go to their products and you go to download those products, sorry, I got to go to resources here. So I'm going to go, so here's where you get those different products. And for whatever reason, the Survey123 for ArcGIS field app is called Survey123. So if you want to fill out a survey on your Windows 10 device, this is the application you would download, or from the Apple Store or Google Play Store. Survey123 Connect is the actual application that you use to build the surveys. Why they had to make them so similar, but that's a typical Esri kind of thing, right? Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think it does.
Okay. So one couple things that we ran into trouble-wise with the surveys. Anytime you push out updates to those surveys, users have to delete those off of their device and then re-download the survey onto their device. Like, let's say you change a list or you change a label. Those will not show up unless they actually physically remove the form and then re-download it. They can still submit, they just won't have access to the new list or the new hints. Another thing that is kind of weird is when you initially publish a form, all those lists generate domains in the ArcGIS Online cloud. However, if you republish a survey by changing anything to that list, that domain does not get updated. It only gets updated in the form that you download. So there's some tools in ArcGIS Online to go in and update those lists. And there's also an extension to Pro that Esri published where you can edit those field lists. They don't technically call them domains. So you could get in trouble where if you download a file geodatabase from the cloud, and the domain that comes with that is going to be the old list, not the new list. So you really gotta, it's funky where if you update a list, you have to actually go in and on a secondary operation and update those lists in the ArcGIS Online cloud. So those repeats, we kind of talked about that a little bit when we were in there. For whatever reason, in the very beginning, those repeats do not show up. You would think that would be an automatic thing, but you have to go in and set those bind parameters. Another weird thing that I run into is when we look at those cascades. So here's one. This value is the label that should be shown for the domain, where that works right in a list. However, in the cascades, all you get is the code. It does not put the label in there. It just doesn't understand that it's a domain anymore because it's looking here to filter here. So one of the tricks that we came up with was in the calculate field, I create a, where are you? So you see all these JR choices. This is where I'm creating a label every time there's a cascade, so that when you go to those downstream products, sorry, I'm bouncing around here. When you go to those operations dashboards and all those other things, you don't want to see that 999, you want to see other, right? So that's something I had to do to trick the service into having a label for those things. And then lastly, one other thing I've learned is if you have just an attachment as a photo and you download that as a file geodatabase, the append and copy in ArcGIS tools respect that as an attachment and will move them. However, you have the ability to have attachments within repeats here. So like when Marie showed the aircraft repeats, and let's say you had to take a picture of each aircraft and you embedded that inside of that repeat, that is no longer honored as an attachment. It's not an attachment directly off the feature. It's an attachment off a related table. So it gets really funky trying to move those around. You got to do some Python scripts and some other things to try and automate that if you wanted to. So those are some of the things we've learned, some pitfalls to get into and think about if you're going to deploy some of these surveys that are more complicated.
All right, great. A couple more questions are coming in. This is for either Marie, oh, where'd my chat go? Where'd it go? For Marie or Ed, how long did it take to stand up the solution?
Yeah, so I actually had to dig back to our original meeting notes and things like that. And so I think, you know, we started with the project sheet right before the holiday season in 2017. And so I don't really count those last couple months of 2017. And so we rolled this out on January 1st of this year. So it was a full 2 years of development to really get this stuff up.
Perfect, great.
Yeah, and just to touch on that, because of how complicated the XLS form was, we probably went through at least 3 drafts that we deployed to the firefighter staff to test in the field before we actually got to that training pilot. So a lot of it was just getting that XLS form to work correctly to make both those forms available as one form.
Great. Another question, will there eventually be a publicly accessible WAL file layer?
So we have a public product in development right now. We haven't chosen to make that spatial layer available. It's just going to be tabular for now to be able to feed some operations dashboards. But we know that there is an interest to be able to see that spatially from the public. And so that's something that we're definitely discussing right now with the administrators.
All right, great. So another question, can Survey123 be deployed on Portal, replicating the survey for a comprehensive enterprise solution? Are you guys using Portal at all, or is this all ArcGIS Online?
I can take that one. So for the Forest Fire Service, no, it's all ArcGIS Online. But yes, you can use the Connect application to build surveys within your portal. The thing that doesn't work very well is that web environment that I showed. So if you come into your survey and you start building surveys in this, it doesn't like the connection to the portal, and there's some firewall issues. And so we've run into trouble trying to deploy a application built with the web. But if you don't create a very complicated survey with your XLS form, you still can use a web browser to fill out the survey. It's just certain things don't work right, like those cascades won't work right. So you can do it within your portal. You just have to be careful about the form you design.
All right, great. And I have one question for Marie. You showed that one slide with the picture of all the staff sitting around the office with the tablets. So what was initially when field crews or others that are looking at an implementation of new technology changing the way they may be doing things, how is that handled, or how is that accepted?
So it's really kind of all across the board. We have a lot of folks that are active in volunteer fire departments. And so their first thought was, okay, let's just buy licenses for that reporting software that they're using in their capacity at the fire departments. Luckily, the wildland fire community really has standardized GIS workflows and expectations to support all of this ArcGIS Online, Survey123, on wildland fire response nationally. And so to us, that was the standard set by NWCG, the National Wildland Fire Coordinating Group, and kind of gave us an out, like, hey, listen, it's NWCG, it's not us. And so really it's cut down tremendously on the amount of radio traffic. And so it really has lessened the burden on our communication infrastructure because all of this information was being transmitted on radio. And so, you know, we've gotten a lot of different mixed feedback. For the most part, folks are on board and they finally acclimated halfway through the year, finally.
Great, very perfect, good job. Any other questions for Marie or Ed? I don't see anything else coming in. So guys, thanks for a great presentation. I mean, that's a great way of showing how to use the technology across the entire organization, right? So thank you. Great.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
All right, perfect. Okay, now we're on to the open discussion announcements portion. I know that Webb had an announcement. So Webb, do you want to I can unmute you. No, no, you're still muted, Webb. Can you unmute yourself? I can't. Let's see here. Go ahead, Webb. I don't think his mic is working. One second.
Webb, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, good morning. My name is Webb Adams. I'm a geographer for the U.S. Census Bureau and the New York Regional Census Center. And first of all, if you haven't answered the census yet, please do so. You now have until October 31st to do so. You can respond anytime by mail, by phone, or online. And you can view the daily response rate at 2020census.gov. Click Get the Facts at the top of the web page. The 2020 census has had several operational adjustments to its schedule because of the coronavirus pandemic. The Update Leave operation, where census enumerators drop off invitations to respond and paper questionnaires at the front door of the residence, resumed in New Jersey on June 1st. Many group quarters, that's the colleges, prisons, nursing homes, etc., have already begun responding through our e-response enumeration option. E-response and paper enumeration for group quarters is occurring through September the 3rd. In-person group quarters enumeration will occur July 1st through September the 3rd. The schedules for service-based enumeration, that's the enumeration of soup kitchens, shelters, and regularly scheduled food vans, enumeration of transitory locations, which is campgrounds, RV parks, marinas, and the count of people experiencing homelessness are under further review. The non-response follow-up operation, that's the operation performed by the enumerators who do the door-to-door knocking if you don't self-respond to the census, has been extended from July 31st to October 31st. And perhaps most important is the adjustment to the date the House of Representatives apportionment counts will be delivered to the President. This had always been a hard and fast date of December 31st of the decennial year, but has been extended to April 30th, 2021. The Census Bureau will deliver redistricting counts to the states by July 31st, 2021. This is of great importance for New Jersey because of our elections in 2021. And since I spent the last year working in the redistricting office, I know that New Jersey and Virginia, because of their election schedule, will get priority in this. We are still recruiting. If you know anyone that needs a job through the end of October, please have them apply at 2020census.gov/jobs. Thank you very much, Dave.
All right, thank you, Webb. Are there any other announcements? I don't see anything else coming through the chat. All right, great. Well, thanks everybody. I think we had a successful virtual geospatial forum meeting. Our next meeting is Friday, October 30th, and we will see how that meeting format will go. But we do know that the Zoom meeting works. And at one point we had about 80 participants today. So again, I thank everybody for attending today. And I will see you all in October, and I hope you enjoy your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.